Coming up on the How Did Happen podcast, today I've got Bill Ottman on the show. Bill's been everywhere. He's the co-founder of a decentralized social media platform called Minds. And we talk about the top 100 websites and why they're representative of humanity pretty well. We talk about why he co-founded Minds, why empathy works, with a special shout out to 𝙍𝙬𝙗𝙧. We talk about the connection between boycotts and cancel culture and a whole lot more. Hey, Bill Ottman, welcome to the podcast.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Yeah, I'm really excited about this. I'm not exactly sure how we got connected. I think someone reached out to me on your behalf and I was like, oh, this guy sounds kind of interesting. And then as I dug in, because I get a lot of those, and it's kind of like, oh, everybody sounds interesting, but as I dug in, I thought, oh, this is a perfect opportunity to bring someone on the show who's got not only just a phenomenally interesting background, but also someone that is willing to talk about so many different things. And by the way, your bio is great. Like all the things you're comfortable talking about. I love it because I like to go in all kinds of directions as well. So anyway, I'm glad we got it together. Let me tell you a little bit about Bill, so you'll get as excited as I am to have him on the show. So Bill Ottman is the co-founder and CEO of Minds. Is it Minds or Minds.com? I've seen both.
Both.
Both? Okay. A decentralized social networking app with 6 million plus users, focused on censorship resistance, global dialogue, privacy, and creator monetization with both traditional payments and cryptocurrency. I love that. He is also the co-author of The Censorship Effect, which is an analysis of the consequences of social media censorship and a proposal for an alternative moderation model. Bill's been, this guy's been everywhere. He's been on Joe Rogan a couple of times. He's been on NPR, Tucker Carlson. The list goes on and on. He is out there and people want to explore. I watched a little bit of Joe exploring some stuff with you. It was very, very interesting. And people want to explore his story and he wants to share, which I think is great. Here's the thing that I find so interesting about his bio. It says some topics Bill could touch on the podcast include, and then it's like a paragraph worth of different things, including satire, comedy, art, misinformation, news, politics, social media, open education, memes, activism. It just goes on and on. And so we are in for a ride today. And Bill, I start every podcast with the same question. That is, how did it happen for you?
It's interesting. In the beginning, you said like topics that I'm comfortable talking about. And yeah, there's definitely a wide variety. And I think that is sort of how it happened for me, in that I realized a while back, like kind of when we were starting, that, the internet is sort of split, where you've got like big tech platforms, mainstream social media, and then you've kind of got like the dark web. You have more of the underground forums and, more of like the places where the more explicit stuff is. And it's very much like, if you look at the top 100 sites on the internet, it's sort of a weird mix of those. You've got all these mainstream sites, but then it's like porn site or 4chan or like, huge kind of more subculture, but massively popular. Mm-hmm. And so it's just fascinating to me that like, because the top 100 websites on the internet do, I think, represent humanity pretty well. These are the places where we spend our time. So I just sort of started realizing that there was this split on the internet and in terms of speech. And that was odd to me. And it seems like, there needs to be a place where, we're talking about everything and like we have access to the full scope of information And, access to information has really always been an essential part of who I am and like what I value. So I guess like mine's is really like how it happened was that I knew we needed an open source, transparent, like fully free speech infrastructure in order for humanity to like do what it needs to do, basically, in order to solve our problems. So that's kind of a long-winded way of saying it, but I feel like we need to be comfortable talking about anything. I mean, no topic is inherently off limits. It's more so like how you talk about it and like what's your intent behind how you talk about it.
Yeah. So a couple things. The top 100 website thing, that was interesting to me. So it's sort of top 100 websites are pretty much represent humanity, you said. And I'm assuming that by that you meant both. Actually, I don't even know if you would describe it this way. Would you describe it as good humanity and bad humanity, or would you just describe it generally as humanity? You can make of that what you will.
Yeah. I mean, I think that all of humanity, we all are good and bad. And I think that sort of where the culture war has come these days is like, it's very much like people trying to say, oh, you're an evil person. These people are good. These people are evil, cast those evil people off the platforms.
Right.
They don't deserve to speak. And I think that obviously there are people who are more evil than others and are, definitely are in a darker place and have all kinds of ideological issues. But what we've learned in terms of de-radicalization and what the censorship effect really looks at is all the peer-reviewed evidence and empirical data on how when you censor people, that makes them more isolated. It actually leads to increased radicalization. We know that social isolation causes depression and can certainly cause people to become more reinforced in sort of their immediate echo chamber. So even though you think you're doing the right thing by banning, whether it be misinformation or hate speech or whatnot, that might be with good intentions, but actually, if you look at literally what's happening, people are becoming more extreme after that happens. So the question is, okay, well, what do we do about it? People like 𝙁𝙚𝙬𝙗, who co-wrote the paper with me, is he's famous for de-radicalizing hundreds of members of the KKK. He's a black man.
Yeah.
And he befriends them. And well, guess what? I mean, that's how you do it. You have to engage it head on, and you have to kind of have that empathy and that humanity in order to, you're not going to force someone to change their mind. You have to just treat them like a human. And that's the only way there's any chance at having any kind of positive change. So this whole kind of status quo of just banish people who disagree with me, like that, it just has to stop.
Yeah. So before I dig into that a little bit more, I want to go back to 𝙁𝙚𝙬𝙗 because I heard Daryl on, I think, Mike Rowe's podcast or some podcast. Mm-hmm. I'd never heard of him before, and I haven't heard of him since until I started, researching you. And that guy has an incredible story. I mean, you mentioned it. He befriends KKK as a black man. But he doesn't ever basically indulge them in what they're in what they do or what they've chosen to do. It's like he's sort of, if I'm getting it right, he befriends them, but he doesn't agree with them, and then he uses his friendship to try to show them that there is another side to the story, and that he, as a person, that they might be told, which really this gets back to, I mean, oftentimes this stuff starts really with what you're told, right, Bill? It's not what you actually believe or, you're told something as a kid, or you come up in a certain environment, and that's just the way it is. That's your belief system. But he has people listening should definitely look him up, because his story was amazing, and it was just so easy to listen to. I could imagine myself being one of those people that he's talking to, and I could see myself sort of start to turn, even though I have no belief system like those people, just by listening to him. How did you meet him?
Yeah, I reached out. We had him. He headlined an event we did a few years back, and I interviewed him, and that's really how. I mean, I was super inspired by his story, and we reached out and wanted to kind of partner with him, and like our goal is to really like bring his strategy to the digital world, because he, and he does a lot of work digitally. He's constantly like chatting with extreme people and emailing, and a lot of change does happen through digital communications already, but he also will like physically go and meet people. And so the question is like, well, okay, so if we know basically empirically that Daryl can do this with a couple hundred people, like that's a big number for one person. How can we scale that? How can we bring that to so that, major social networks are like helping drive this? Imagine, Facebook spends $10 billion or however much on social media moderation. They're just doing ban. What if you had, an army of mental health and like kind of positive interventionists, mental health specialists and positive interventionists who are going around creating dialogue with, people who were, showing kind of extreme beliefs. It's just a thought experiment to kind of like, that is an alternative world that we could live in, where major social networks were actually participating in this proactive dialogue as opposed to just shutting it down. And so, yeah, I mean, that's why we reached out. And yeah, I mean, obviously he doesn't indulge them. Like he doesn't befriend them like, hey, like, let's go to the bar and like, make fun of, well, he does go to a bar, but he's not like, but he's not trying to convince them. Like the whole kind of psychology of it is that when you come at somebody too hard saying like, I'm right, you're wrong, it's like people just shut down. Like no one, even if they agree with you, they don't want to be forced like in the moment to change their mind. Like people need to think that they're coming to these ideas on their own. And so he'll just befriend people, hang out with them, listen to their story. He'll let them spew their nonsense, into infinity. But there comes a point after they've spewed out all their nonsense where they've said it all.
It starts to sound like nonsense to them.
It starts to sound like nonsense to them because he's just sitting there being so reasonable, listening. And then eventually they ask him a question about him. And, that can take a long time. But, a lot of people, in any interaction you have, like, I mean, I'm curious your experience with this, but like, if you've just met someone and they're just nonstop talking and like, don't ask you anything about you, it's just like, okay, well, I'm hanging out with a narcissist. Like, what? So that signal when someone who, first asks you a question about you and your experience, like that's actually the breakthrough moment where he starts to notice. And, I've been doing some of this myself as well. Like I'll reach out to some more extreme people on Minds and get dialogues going. And, some of them have been incredibly productive. So, I think that we're just in this mode socially, globally, where, people are afraid to engage because of this like guilt by association, but really like you cannot change someone's mind, or people have no chance of changing their mind if you're not even going to be able to communicate with them.
Yeah, sure. And I definitely agree with you that as soon as you tell someone they're wrong, I think it's human nature to be like, well, wait a second, on a wall like immediately goes up. What do you mean I'm wrong? I'm not wrong. You're wrong. And as you start playing like a kid's game, sort of back and forth there. And I don't feel like that's very helpful. I wanted to ask you about, you sort of intimated Facebook and maybe Twitter with their, delete, 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 right? So, and I'm wondering how much of that has been the result of them being public corporations where, they have, there's a lot of pressure on them from government, from stakeholders and others about, hey, you have this thing out there, you need to police it. And I mean, you can't have these people doing these kinds of things, as opposed to maybe what their natural inclination might be, which is similar to what you were just talking about. Like, okay, hey, it's a platform. People are free to use the platform. And really, when you get down to it, you need to invite into your life someone that you think is, hateful or whatever. They don't charge their way in just because they keystroke something onto the internet. What's your feeling about that versus you with Minds.com as a private company that maybe doesn't have some of those same things? Or am I sort of?
Yeah, that's interesting. I mean, I think that public companies are still, subject to the same laws that we are, generally speaking. It's not, if anything, I think a lot of the politicization and, kind of ideological censorship hurts their bottom line. You look at, you're literally alienating. If you're going to ban everybody who is posting a study about COVID that may not be mainstream, or, just go down the list of random kind of normal-ish people who are getting banned for some kind of insignificant offense. Look, I want to clarify, like, we do ban people. Like, we have a content policy, like, people can't go around making threats. It's not just like, it's not just total free for all. We have a whole kind of sensitivity filter system so that explicit content, isn't being shown. And, there's strikes, which you get if you don't flag your own content and self-label. But I think that the international conversation is interesting because, other countries do have more strict laws than the US. And, but this is kind of the debate that you hear. You hear debates about, like, Google building, offering search in China and stuff like that. And, like, should they do that? Should Google build a censored version of Google so that they can enter the Chinese market? And we know that Google wants to do that. There's this whole Dragonfly project, which is controversial, which they've been working on that, but they don't want to do it because they know that the backlash of actually doing that will be bad. Because that's what's fascinating. I think that people in the US are like, they think about China and North Korea and they say, oh yeah, that's too far. They're censoring people way too much over there in China. But then meanwhile, they're sort of like okay with the version of censorship that we have in the US. And so there's there's this weird hypocrisy there. And I think that companies are realizing, Coinbase, for instance, just came out. I don't know if you saw their statement about kind of depoliticizing their company and how they're going to stay mission driven on crypto. Their CEO wrote this blog about how kind of social activism had start to become like a huge distraction within the company. And, because there's all of these social causes, and I'm not trying to make a judgment call on all the, the various social issues, but, every company doesn't have to fight for every social issue. That can become amazingly distracting for the company's success as well. So, Yeah, I don't know if that answers your question, but I don't, there are no laws for public companies that would require them to take, censor more information necessarily.
Yeah. And I guess I wasn't sort of making it an obligatory thing. I was just thinking about the pressure, that's just coming from, I'm thinking about this, like Zuckerberg up before the Senate, and all these senators want to, look like they're doing something. And there's a lot of pressure that comes along with that. So I was just wondering.
There is. I mean, yeah, that's absolutely true. So, COVID hits, you're Zuckerberg, you're on the stand, and they're saying there's all this misinformation flowing through your network. Elections are being influenced. And yeah, it's very difficult to stand up to that and say, like, listen, this is lawful content. And, it may be, we may put it into some sort of limited state, which is the type of answer that we would be comfortable with. Like, depending on, how sensitive it is, it could go behind a sensitivity filter. But misinformation is like, what does misinformation mean?
Yeah, it depends on who's, it depends on who's defining it, and it's a lot like science says. Misinformation is, science says, everything that people couch behind some unknown thing, but they present it as if it's a known thing.
Exactly. I mean, misinformation, obviously so you have misinformation, disinformation. From what I've read, disinformation is more intentional, malicious spread, malicious content that like is kind of like knowingly being used to, spread, to defame somebody or spread wrong information. Misinformation is more like maybe unknowingly people are just sharing stuff that is false. And so, if you think about that, like your aunt sees some news article, just the headline interests her, she doesn't really read it, she just shares it, banned. She made a mistake. Misinformation is like, are people not allowed to be wrong? I mean,
hey, everybody, just a quick pause here to let you know how much I appreciate that you've made time for my podcast. If you're not already a subscriber, please become one today. Leave a review and tell a friend. Now, let's get back to the show.
They need to be able to be wrong. You can't expect, like, just because somebody accidentally shares, some clickbait article. What are you going to do? You're going to take away their whole social media that they've been spending 10 years building up, and so that they can run their little t-shirt business. I mean, it's insane. So I think that it's not to say that there aren't threats that exist with misinformation, disinformation, but it's such a blanket term that anything can get thrown under, and such a scary term that, let's talk about what it actually means. And additionally, like making the appeal process, like one thing that we've worked pretty hard on is we have a jury system for our appeal process. So if a user thinks that we made a mistake, they can actually send an appeal, and then that goes to 12 active users so that our community can sort of hold us in check in case we make mistakes. And, I think it's mostly about that. It's not to say don't ever take down content. It's more so saying, like, have a fair process to, make sure that content really is, over the line. In our case, we do think that the First Amendment is a battle-tested line. I mean, why would a handful of lawyers at a social media company be more competent than constructing a speech policy than, centuries of legal precedent in the United States. Like the legal precedent that exists around speech in the US is like, it's, you know, battle tested. I mean, like, and the US is, I think we can say, I would hope we could say, has like a lot of, you know, the freedom of speech that we have is valuable and creates a healthy society. And, you know, that freedom to disagree and that freedom to be wrong, or that freedom to offend, you know, even though we might not like it sometimes, you know, that is what you need freedom of speech for. You need it for the minority opinion, for the controversial opinion. So, you know, that's why the ACLU like traditionally would defend the KKK in court, which kind of parallels the work that 𝙬𝙬 does. When you get into this situation of, oh, if it's, you know, if it makes certain people uncomfortable, then it has to be taken down. Like the place that can take us is extremely dangerous. So I think that what 𝙬𝙬 teaches us is to invert our lens that we're experiencing controversial content or speech, and like take that more empathetic approach. I mean, there's a study that came out recently, which I can just read you the headline quickly. It's out of Stanford University. It's called Empathy-Based Counter Speech Can Reduce Racist Hate Speech in a Social Media Field Experiment. So what this study did is it said, I'm just going to quickly read the abstract because it's so fascinating. It just came out in earlier, like within the last year. So the abstract: despite heightened awareness of the detrimental impact of hate speech on social media platforms on affected communities and public discourse, there's little consensus on approaches to mitigate it. While content moderation, either by governments or social media companies, can curb online hostility, such policies may suppress valuable as well as illicit speech and might disperse rather than reduce hate speech. Key phrase. As an alternative strategy, an increasing number of international and non-governmental organizations are employing counter speech to confront and reduce online hate speech. Despite their growing popularity, there's a scant experimental evidence on the effectiveness and design of counter speech strategies. Modeling our interventions on current I/NGO practice, we randomly assign English-speaking Twitter users who have sent messages containing xenophobic or racist hate speech to one of three counter speech strategies: empathy, warning of consequences, and humor. So basically, you know, sometimes they would approach people who are being racist with empathy. Sometimes they would approach them with a warning, and sometimes they would approach with humor. Our intention to treat analysis of 1,350 Twitter users shows that empathy-based counter speech messages can increase the retrospective deletion of xenophobic hate speech by 0.2 standard deviation and reduce the prospective creation of xenophobic hate speech over a 4-week follow-up by 0.1 standard. So that is amazing. I mean, first of all, that, you know, so they took these different these different intervention approaches, and they found that the empathetic approach had the most impact. And I mean, look, this is the reality. Like, Stanford University researchers are aware of the fact that banning content disperses it. It doesn't mitigate it. And, you know, so this is how the academics are approaching this.
Yeah. Well,
yeah.
And it makes so much sense, because just as a human being, right? Empathy, when someone has empathy for me, they've disarmed me like right away. Empathy disarms me. Now, it may not change me, but it disarms me. And when I'm disarmed, I'm in a condition where I'm calmer, where I'm maybe willing to discuss, where I don't feel alienated, where I feel like I matter, you know, and all of these positive things, right? And if you want to get to me, that's a great place to start. If you start somewhere else, you're going to have a second.
Be nice, be kind. Wait, what?
Right. Yeah. What a concept, right? I don't know that they needed to do that study. So I want to get, thanks for sharing that. I do want to get back to that thing, the example you used about, sending on a headline that you read and being banned for that in particular, because it struck me as very interesting that all of the platforms have a share or a retweet or something encouraging you to do just that, right? And not encouraging it because they expect that you believe in whatever you're sharing. They want it because they want other people to engage with whatever that content is and stay on the platform, right? That's kind of why it's there, right? So that was an interesting example that you used. Like, yeah, getting banned for that. I mean, that's the whole purpose, is to share stuff that you didn't read.
Right. It's like, well, wait a second. Wait a second, Twitter. You put that button in front of me.
Right. On purpose. Yes. For the explicit reason that I used it. Like, that's what exactly the behavior you wanted.
Right.
Yeah. I mean, same as like, right? I like, people go through and they like. They don't even look. They like. So it's not, that's a really, really terrible trap to put somebody in, where you can get banned over something like that. And you also used the word offend, and I wanted to dig into that a little bit with you, because I have this opinion that you as a person can't offend me. Only I can invite you. I can be offended by you only if I invite you into me. Like, you can't offend me on your own, because you're just saying something, or you're doing something or whatever that I may or may not agree with. But as far as actually being offended, that's something I need to invite into my life. And I'd like to know how you think about that.
Absolutely. It's completely true. And it gets back to that sort of lens that whether we're viewing social media or any kind of social interaction. I mean, some random person comes up to you and insults you. Like, that is your decision if you're going to let that into your consciousness and let that kind of dictate your feeling about yourself. You can approach, like, the empathetic approach to people who are trying to offend you is so helpful, because you're looking at all of this through more of a frame of mental health. So, your own mental health and their mental health. Somebody who's just like a bigot on the internet, or somebody who you're, in a social situation with and is just, a total jerk, like, that's ultimately the place that I like to be at. I'm not always able to do this, but, feel sorry for them. I mean, they have issues if that is how they're behaving. So if you feel that empathy for them, because they're clearly struggling, they're probably depressed, or, have their own mental issues, which is what's causing them to, whether it's be racist or just be a jerk in general. That is a very useful exercise for me, whether it's, engaging digitally or physically, to just maintaining my own sanity.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, to me too, that as soon as you choose to engage in a way that's not maybe looking to be empathetic or whatever, you're basically empowering the person. You're basically transferring power from you to the person that they see. It's just a choice. It's like the same choice as being offended. You're making a choice to bring relevance and power to them. I just I don't get it.
Yeah. And I think that, the times when we do let ourselves get offended, it's, it is us sort of agreeing with their interpretation. And so, the times when I'll let it get to me sometimes is like, ultimately I think the best, you don't want to read the comments too much. I mean, people will, because then you're just giving them more mental real estate. So, reading through all the feedback, taking it with a grain of salt. And then, if a couple of the comments get to you, let it be for the reason, not that it's just because they said something mean and it's getting to you, but like I'll see a grain of truth in what they're saying. And like, I want feedback about myself as well. And so I might take that, I want to be open to feedback, but not to the point where it's just going to take over all my mental real estate and make me depressed.
Yeah, that's a great point, because it's not, there could be some truth in what someone says that,
right.
And you can be big enough to accept that without being, and you can, without doing permanent damage, I guess, even if that or non-permanent damage, but more damage than it deserves, I guess. So so you grew up in Norwalk, Connecticut, as I understand it. My wife's from 𝙁𝙗𝙗𝙧𝙗. You're probably
no way.
familiar,
Yeah, I went to
yeah.
𝙁𝙗𝙗𝙧𝙗 school. Yeah.
Oh, you did? Okay.
Yeah.
So did she. And then Brian McMahon High School.
All right.
So I'm wondering what has happened along the way. You mentioned early on that you've been, always interested in access and transparency, and maybe even taken that to a further degree. And I'm wondering what if anything happened along the way to you that got you, that made this a mission for you, particularly the free speech, the internet banning, the transparency, the user as the product, all of these things that you hear about. I mean, what happened?
I think that I went to University of Vermont, and I became very much like an activist up there. Definitely got into a lot of social causes, like doing anti-war protests and, working on divestment campaigns at the university to get them to like pull their money out of weapons manufacturers, which oddly most universities are invested in. But and also in Burlington, Vermont, everything is very like local. It's all about local food. It's all, people are very focused on, organic lifestyle and, where do the vote with your dollars type attitude.
Right.
And that had a pretty significant impact on me. And because I think voting with your dollars is just such a true statement. It's such a true philosophy. You can yell and scream about all of the issues that you want, but at the end of the day, what actually changes things is when, large groups of people start moving their resources around in strategic ways and either removing resources from corrupt places and then, putting them towards whatever it is that is doing it right. And I basically applied that digitally, and I uncovered kind of the whole open source movement, the whole privacy movement, the cypherpunks, and how online you have this split between, closed source surveillance software and open source ethical software. And so you've got, an easy example for people is like Brave or Firefox browsers versus, Safari. And we use these tools every day. But what does that do? Like when you load up your computer and you just let Apple or Microsoft dictate the tools that you're using every day, you are just their agent. You're just working on behalf of them kind of mindlessly, and you're feeding them. And most people have no idea about this. They're just like, oh, I got my computer. Oh, Safari is preloaded or Microsoft Edge is preloaded. Okay, guess I'll use those browsers. But actually all you have to do, you can easily download a different browser. And from then on, the 100 times a day that you check your browser, you're then feeding it to a company that is doing things right and actually doing things in support of the community and, not abusing people. So it's.
Hey everyone, if you like what I'm doing with this podcast and want to participate in more of the things I'm thinking about and exploring, subscribe to my newsletter today. It's super simple. Just go to 𝘼𝙘𝙧𝙚.com right now, put in your email, and you will get the very next issue. It's short, thoughtful, and designed to inspire, activate, and maximize the greatness in you.
It's relatively easy to make that shift and be funneling all of your energy every day on your phone and on your computer towards companies that are acting on, for the benefit of humanity rather than just extracting value. So I kind of made that connection between the vote with your dollars, like locally up in Vermont, with, how the world is using the internet, because the internet is so powerful and is going to be a huge part in changing the world for the better. But so I've really just been focused on spreading that message, and Minds is just an example of that. Like, you can use Minds, not even to say you have to give up big tech and Facebook and Twitter and Google, but add that into your sort of diet online, like add alternatives in. Like, it's not to say never use Google Chrome, but use Brave once in a while. Not to say never use, YouTube and Facebook. Obviously, you're probably going to sometimes, but minimize it when you have to, and use DuckDuckGo to do some searches, because those search queries empower that company to kind of protect the planet more. So yeah.
Well, you brought up something very interesting. First, I'll mention that our Zoom is on a Brave browser.
Nice.
So I do have that going. And I think one of the things that you mentioned, and I don't know if this is what you mean by open source versus closed source, but people don't. I think the average person, 99, maybe 95 out of 100, have no understanding of how much information using Google, for example, and I use Google. Sometimes you can't get a website to perform on Brave, and you have to go to Chrome or something. But
right.
How much information you're agreeing in the terms and conditions or use terms or whatever to provide them to have access to. Like, I ended up going to a VPN because I went to a presentation and this guy just scared the crap out of me, Bill, about all the stuff that, not only all the stuff that they're taking or have access to, but all the ways that people can get to you in a bad way. And like for example, people don't understand, like when you use Gmail or something like that, everything in that you send, including all your attachments, all that stuff, you've given them access to that material, right? So, and nobody cares about it until they care, until something happens, and then you're like, what did I do? That's a really big issue. I'm glad you brought that up.
Yeah, I think the whole, I have nothing to hide, so I don't care type attitude is extremely common, and is sort of just an excuse to, take the easy path. But the people who say, I don't have anything to hide, so I don't care, I don't think it's actually a sincere statement. Because if they didn't have anything to hide, well, then why aren't they, publishing all of their text messages? I mean, like, why aren't they inviting people into all of their private information? Or like, why do they lock their door of their house? Like, people say that, but they do have things that they probably don't want getting out there. And also, just like you said, you don't know when you're going to need it.
Right.
So like Snowden says that just because, saying I don't need privacy because I have nothing to hide is like saying I don't need free speech because I have nothing to say. It's like, you don't most people aren't out there on the street corners like blasting, all their thoughts for the sake of free speech, but that doesn't mean they don't want the theoretical ability to have that right when they may need it.
Yeah. So this idea for mine started percolating, what, 2011 or so, Bill? Is that, do I have the time frame right on that?
Kind of after I graduated from college, we were doing these events called Gathering of the Minds, and they would be sort of a hybrid public forum / music festival. And, we would kind of hold them in city parks and at different venues. And we did some at the university, and they were great, but they just weren't really scaling as much as I wanted them to. Live events are really challenging as well. And so, yeah, we just kind of took to the internet to kind of generate the dialogue. And actually we held an event, another live event just in June recently at the Beacon Theater in New York City. We had Daryl Davis, Cornel West, Tulsi Gabbard, Ben Burgess, Tim Pool, James O'Keefe, Seth Dillon, the Babylon Bee, Destiny. He's like a popular gamer, debate YouTuber. Winston Marshall from Mumford & Sons, who had been like kind of had to leave the band because of some controversial, it wasn't even very controversial, but anyway, he had to leave the band because he said something that I guess his fans didn't like. And a bunch of other really interesting, Coleman Hughes. And so just people across the political spectrum on the left and the right. And then we had stand-up comedians as well in between each act to kind of lighten it up. And, just trying to keep that face-to-face dialogue happening, because we do want to be generating that. We don't want to lose touch with the real world. And I think that people are much more willing to be human in person than through a screen. So yeah, it was really great. And some amazing conversations came out of it. And I think that that's what we're seeing is just that, look what's happening with podcasting, like what we're doing right now. I find myself, I'll watch like 5 hours or listen to 5 hours of podcasts a day sometimes. It's just what the long form model is so much better for, really getting to know what someone's about, what their intentions are, the whole kind of legacy media, little short bursts, like flashy headlines, shallow analysis. It's just over. Like you don't learn anything from that.
Right. I completely agree. In fact, I don't listen to any of those podcasts anymore, the short ones, because all that there's time for is someone like you, Bill, to come on and tell me something that you're programmed to tell, and you tell it all the time. It's like your thing that you just do. And there's never any chance to get behind it. Like, why do you do that? Why does it make sense for me to listen to you? All of those kinds of things. Yeah. And I just,
no, you need that time. Absolutely. And like, even, I'll be honest, like even on long form, because, we all have our things that we do. Like, I really appreciate you like digging deeper and like understanding like, well, why, like, where did this come from? Like, no, let's like keep peeling back, because, sometimes I'll do shows and even if it's like an hour or something, I'll be like, wow, did I really even say anything new? Like, or did I just kind of go through my normal story without kind of getting deeper? And so you do need to make deliberate effort to find that unique content, particularly with people who are podcasting all the time. So it takes deliberate effort to dive deeper.
So square this one up for me. You talked about your experience at University of Vermont, and that was very good what you said about, getting people to, vote with their dollars, right? Vote with your dollars. So when you start impacting someone economically, it matters. They notice, right? Then you mentioned that the fellow from Mumford, and it made me think: how do you and this whole thing, and then with the freedom of speech, how do you think about or square up cancel culture? Like, because it seems like you with the vote for your dollars, that's sort of a cancer culture type thing. Like, hey, we're gonna impact you, which is, you might not call that cancel culture,
like a boycott.
Boycott, yeah, which seems to me like the same thing. And I wondered how you, like, that's a weird thing.
That's
like all the things I've heard. That's a weird thing to square it up.
Absolutely. It's like there's a weird paradox about it.
Yeah.
And I've thought about this exact thing. Like, isn't boycotting basically cancel culture? Or, voting with your dollars type mindset. And I think, like, anyone who says that, you can't boycott because that's cancel culture. Like, that's going too far in like the anti-cancel culture direction. I think that people are subject to consequences for what they do. Mm-hmm. And I don't think that, also just because you boycott a company doesn't mean that you never give that company a chance to redeem themselves. Like, I would be willing to boycott a company and still carry on dialogue and potentially stop boycotting them. So a lot of it has to do with, is there a path to redemption? Are you completely like eliminating them from the realm of forgiveness? Or are you just kind of taking a stance saying, look, I'm not going to feed you resources anymore, but I'll still talk to you. So I think that there's more nuance to it. I'm not anti-cancel culture in every sense. If someone deserves a consequence, they should get that consequence. But this isn't like blood sports. Like, we shouldn't just be trying to like decimate somebody into the ground. We should have the long-term goal of transformation.
So let's talk about that a little bit, because as you were saying that, I'm thinking, okay, so different types of things lead to efforts to cancel someone. So I immediately, for whatever reason, I thought of Louis C.K., right? And people like Louis, who get into situations that with behavior that is inappropriate. Let's just put it that way. Versus people who just say something, and I don't know what this Mumford fellow said, but people who just say something that, to get back to our earlier discussion, is said to offend people. So there wasn't any behavior, there wasn't like any deviant or weird behavior or law broken or anything like that, but still the result was similar. Is that what you were saying in terms of what you feel could be justified cancel versus unjustified cancel, or help me understand better?
So, I think that the calls to sort of cancel somebody, I think the tolerance is way kind of unbalanced. Like, people are getting called out, and, even like Dave Chappelle got deplatformed from, a venue, I think it was in Minnesota recently. It's like that cancel culture, as it's commonly understood these days, I think has absolutely gone way too far. And it's just so much more extreme. It's like they're trying to assassinate the person's character. And as opposed to just address the specific issue that's at hand, and trying to resolve it. So like in the Mumford case, it was totally benign. Like, he posted that he had just read Andy Ngo's book. Andy Ngo is like the Portland journalist who like covers Antifa and stuff like that. he posted that he read Andy Ngo's book, and then suddenly, oh my God, he read a book that, I disagree with the author. Like how could he? And, so that's just, that's absurd. People who actually have, I don't.
Just a short break here to ask you a question. Have you read my book? It's called Ownership: How Getting Selfish Got Me Unstuck, and it's available on Amazon, Audible, and everywhere else. If you're looking for inspiration that will help you unlock your greatness and potential, order or download your very own copy today.
The Louis thing is interesting because it's definitely inappropriate, but it's also like sort of this like a certain type of gray area, which I think is why he's like come back on the scene, and people have been accepting to that, which I think is a good thing that he's being sort of accepted back. But then, in like Harvey Weinstein type situation, like, yeah, like that guy needs to go to jail probably. So, but that doesn't, again, mean that Harvey Weinstein isn't a human and shouldn't be treated as such. And hopefully, like, he can change as well. Like, I think most people just want Harvey's, neck slit, which that's just like not health. That's not helpful.
Right. And you bring up a good point that by the way, he got fired from the band because he said that he liked a book.
He didn't get fired, but basically what happened is there was so much sort of backlash from the community that he felt so uncomfortable with like how the rest of the band felt, and he didn't want to put them into too difficult. I think that they didn't overtly kick him out, but they were all super uncomfortable, and so he sort of like stepped away. So it was this immense social pressure that he felt, and he didn't want to hurt his bandmates. I personally think that they should not have let him leave. For him to say, listen, guys, this is causing too much heat for the band. I'm going to step away from a second. That's fine for him to say. That's honestly like honorable. They should have been like, no, dude, like we're going to get through this. You're a core band member, but they didn't. And things, I guess, seem okay. And, that's how it happened. But yeah, it's intense. I mean, he was their lead guitarist, and
right.
Yeah.
Well, it made me wonder, like, but getting back to the boycott thing, like, was it really that he, said that he read this book, or did that start to have an economic impact on the band because sponsors or venues or whatever? Like, I'm trying to think like, everything gets back to money,
Right.
So we're with you, but as soon as it starts hitting our wallet,
I don't think that it reached that point. I would have to touch base with them. I don't think that they were getting like kind of deplatformed or anything, but I think there was just a lot of concern from the fans, and maybe that could have potentially had an economic impact. I don't know, but I would imagine that there's also an economic impact to him leaving. So
right, sure, yeah, good point. And just to be, I wasn't like trying to narrow in on what you know about that specific situation. I was just kind of thinking in general, does it always come back to money? Like when it starts to hit the wallet, that's when you get to be a little bit shaky on whether you're supporting someone because they're just saying what they believe. Yeah, it can get a little shaky then, right?
I think that the interesting thing with like advertisers, like that's a common tactic recently, is like, okay, if there's someone with wrongthink, you get a mob who goes after the advertisers and sponsors, and okay, yeah, like they're taking the boycott approach. But I think that the world, it's a big world. There's a lot of people on the left and the right, and there are a lot of companies that are run by people on the left and the right. So for YouTube, for instance, to say like, oh, we're going to demonetize all of this content because it's, not advertiser friendly. Well, what does that really mean? Because let's take a popular example, Steven Crowder. who runs like he has a huge conservative talk show. He got demonetized on YouTube for a while. I'm not sure if he still is demonetized. He may or may not be, but he certainly was for a long time. And, there are many huge companies, maybe a lot of them are conservative type companies or run by conservative people who want to advertise on him. So regardless of what YouTube says, he has an extremely popular show, which a lot of people like, maybe some people don't like, but this whole like advertiser friendly meme that's going around, that's assuming that all advertisers are thinking about their marketing politically. Like, for instance, like a computer company, why do they necessarily care if they're advertising on top of, really conservative news or really progressive news? They're trying to sell computers. Everybody needs a computer. So it's like advertiser friendly is just like, I don't even think that it's a accurate phrase. It's almost a misleading phrase, because it's actually what it should be is, advertiser. This is not friendly to advertisers who are only targeting certain type of content. I mean, that didn't come out right, but like, you see what I'm saying?
Right. I do.
Yeah.
So I'm going to wrap it up here, but you've, at least from what I've read, you've got 6+ million users. Maybe it's higher now from, you've had a couple of rounds of funding, like $16 million worth of funding, something like that, give or take. I don't know if I'm right there. And I'm wondering a couple of things. Where are you going with Minds? Where do you want it to go? Does it change things for you and your co-founder? Is your co-founder your brother?
My brother is our COO and he is a co-founder.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So I'm wondering where you see this going, what you want people to do. And I'm also wondering, now that you've got investors, does it change anything for you, Bill?
Well, we're very fortunate with our investors that, particularly with our Series B with this group called FUTO, FUTO.org, which is a tech freedom organization, which is really like passionate about our philosophy. And so they're not like a VC. They're, really trying to build sovereign, freedom respecting technology. So that's a blessing that we've linked up with them. And, what we're trying to do is sort of like in this conversation, we've been talking a lot about, the controversial stuff.
Sure.
I will say that it's only a small percentage of the content on Minds that's even like that. Like for the most part, our biggest communities are like gaming communities, art communities, music, journalists.
Normal
stuff. Yeah. So it's like and it's funny that conversations often get dominated by this because it's sort of a hot topic and it is a very unique approach that we take. But yeah, so that's important context, but also like we are trying to decentralize our infrastructure, which may be nerdy to people listening, or like they might not even know what that means. But at the end of the day, we don't want to be the middlemen and the gatekeepers between people and their social media. So like the issue is that if you get banned from Twitter or Facebook or YouTube, you're losing the followers and identity and content that you've been working on for years. So they control your identity. But where we really want to get to is a place where you own and control your identity. And if some platform, whether or not they ban you, even if you just want to leave, you can take your followers and identity and content with you. That's portable, with you. And the content and the social graph can be stored on an underlying decentralized protocol, not in some data center of Facebook's. So that's what we're starting to achieve. And, you know, we didn't really get too much into crypto, but a lot of it has to do with cryptographic keys, where you have these public keys, and that's sort of your identity. It's like and you can still have a username and whatnot, but this idea of a key, which signs different content to attest that it's your content. And then when you follow somebody, you're also using a cryptographic signature. And so you have this key pair, and then you have all of the things that you've either created or followed. All of those signatures create this sort of web of you, which is your stuff and the thing and the other users that you care about. And ultimately, we want to get to a place where, you know, there are common open protocols so that you can pop between mines and whatever other network, and there's interoperability between them, and so that you own your stuff more. And, you know, we're making really good progress on it. So architecturally, that's where we want to go. And then otherwise, I would just say that we're really focused on creators and helping creators get more reach and revenue. And we have really cool tools, you know, so anyone out there listening, like whether or not you're a big creator, small creator, like, you know, you can, a lot of people will get more reach on mines, particularly small creators, than they get on Twitter and Facebook, because our community is just more creator focused. There's more, you can earn tokens, and then tokens can be used to boost your content, or we don't have any weird algorithms. So, you know, we're just trying to put creators first at the end of the day.
Okay. Well, I've downloaded the app, did that this morning, and I'm planning to join and sign up. Because
what's your username?
I haven't joined yet. I'll shoot you.
You just downloaded the app.
I just downloaded the app. Yeah, I have to join. I'll shoot you a note on my username.
Nice.
And I encourage people to check it out, because these things we've been talking about, even though we didn't spend a ton of time on what we just did at the end here, these are really important things. And if you want to express yourself and own your content and have it be portable and not be the product, you know, have your stuff be the product. This is something that needs to be out there for sure. Just like Brave and DuckDuckGo and some of these other things that need to be out there. So Bill, I thank you so much for creating this and coming on the podcast to talk about it and all the other things we talked about. I appreciate that as well. I
really enjoyed it.
Your email is simple, right? So it's just bill@minds.com. Is that right?
Yeah, hit me up. That's how people can... if you want to find me on Minds, it's minds.com/Ottman, Ottman. And yeah, hit me up, tag me. I'll share, I'll help boost your content. And yeah, look forward to keeping the conversation going.
All right. Sounds good. I'm going to be there. Bill, thanks so much for being on the show.
Cheers.